Assalamu alaikum. You're listening to the New Beginnings podcast. No fluff, no holding back. Just honest conversations about your journey as a new Muslim.
Brought to you by New Beginnings, a platform that aims to support new Muslims on their journey through Islam, from the Shahada and beyond. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Bilal and welcome back to all our listeners. We hope you're well and keeping in the best of faith. Once again, I'm joined by my co-host, Amanda Sensei.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you once again for joining us. So now, this week, unless you are living in a cave with no Wi-Fi, everyone knows that Ramadan is just around the corner.
So today we are going to be answering your questions about this holy month. Questions our followers and listeners have sent in over the last few weeks.
And mashallah, our guest today is Dr. Akmal Shakur. Welcome, Dr. Akmal. And he's joining us to help us deal with any medical questions that have been sent in. Dr. Akmal, would you mind introducing yourself to our listeners, please?
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, exactly. My name is Akmal. I qualified from the University of Manchester Medical School several years ago now. And I've been working in a variety of hospitals all across the UK for the past several years. At the moment, I'm taking a bit of a break from training and locuming as a medical registrar at Royal Oldham Hospital in the Northern Care Alliance. As part of that, I'm also a trustee of an organisation called AskDoc. AskDoc is an organisation which works to promote health in the minority ethnic communities. So, yeah, so that's a bit about me, and thank you for having me on your podcast today.
Yeah, thank you for coming on, Dr. Akmal Shakur. It's no relation to Tupac, is it?
No. That's from my teenage years.
And the organisation you mentioned, how do people find out more about that?
Yeah, so you can find us on our Twitter handle is probably best right now. We're going through a bit of a rebranding, so our website's down. But if you find us on at AskDoc1, so that's one with the number one, at AskDoc1, you'll learn a lot more about us and some of the work that we do.
Yeah, so mashallah, that's good. Usually on this podcast, our guests are all converts to Islam. But today we've made an exception because we needed to find a medical professional who has good Islamic knowledge. And we know that you have studied extensively with scholars. So your Islamic knowledge is good. And also you have the medical knowledge as well. So thank you for coming.
We have had several questions sent in to us. Some of them are about rulings, about fasting, about Ramadan. Some of them, however, are medical questions. So I'm going to ask the questions, and either Dr. Akmal or Sheikh Bilal will be answering, inshallah. So let's start off. Our first question today is a medical one. The person writes, I am a type 2 diabetic. Is it all right for me to try fasting? So this person is a convert to Islam. They haven't fasted before and they have type 2 diabetes. Is it okay for them to try fasting?
Okay, so this is probably the most common question I get to when it comes to Ramadan. Diabetes and Ramadan, it's a very difficult one. So diabetes has many types, and this individual who's asked has obviously got type 2 diabetes. Now, I think it's important to know a bit about what happens when we're fasting. So usually after we've had a meal.
So sorry to interrupt. Can you just explain the difference between type 1 and type 2? Just a pretty quick.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So essentially type 1 is when your body can't produce enough of a hormone called insulin. So people tend to be diagnosed with that when they're a lot younger. And so that has to be replaced manually. So we can have insulin injections to help with those people. With type 2 diabetics, this tends to be related more to lifestyle. So poor lifestyle choices in terms of diet and exercise, etc., and being constantly exposed to high levels of sugar can, as well as there is also the case of a genetic predisposition to these things, would mean that your body doesn't respond to the insulin that's being released. Okay. And so these patients might not necessarily need insulin to control their diabetes, and they can be controlled with just diet, or they can be controlled with other medications. So that tends to be the big difference between the two. Now, when somebody is fasting at about 8 hours after our last meal, our body will start to use the energy stores to keep our blood glucose levels stable. Now, in most people, that's absolutely fine, and that's not harmful at all. Now, with patients who have diabetes, there's an increased risk of complications, particularly having really low blood sugar levels called hypoglycemic episodes. And this can be quite dangerous and life-threatening. But also you can have hyperglycemic episodes, which are high blood sugar levels, particularly when you have your iftar and your suhoor meals. Now, if somebody has type 2 diabetes and it's just controlled by diet only, I would say that it's safe to fast. Okay, it's absolutely fine to fast, and there will be some precautions that I'd advise them to take, but which I'll talk about later, but it's generally safe to fast. Even if they have type 2 diabetes and they're on some medications, but the type 2 diabetes is controlled well, I would say it's safe to fast again. Okay, as a generic rule, it would be safe to fast. There are some medications that patients can take. For example, some patients will take a medication which is called a sulfonylurea, for example, gliclazide. And so somebody who's on that medication will know what I'm talking about. For them, it might be a case of making sure that their diabetes is well controlled. If it's not well controlled, if they're on this kind of medication, I would suggest that it's not safe to fast. I would say it's not safe to fast in this person, particularly if it's not well controlled. Also, if they're on insulin, so somebody with type 2 diabetes on insulin and it's not a basal insulin regime, again, the person with diabetes will know what I mean. If it's not a basal insulin regime, like a mixed insulin regime, then I would suggest this patient should not fast, okay? That's even if the diabetes is well controlled. If they're on just a basal insulin regime and the diabetes is well controlled, I'd say it's safe to fast in that case. So if the diabetes is poorly controlled, regardless, I wouldn't want this patient to fast. Okay, but if it's well controlled and with the things that I mentioned earlier, it's safe to fast. But there's a few things that's very important for every diabetic now. It's always talk to the diabetes team before they start fasting, because it's really important. And we're about 10 days away from Ramadan, maybe 7 to 10 days now, 7 days maybe from Ramadan. And it's probably a little bit my fault that we're so close, because I was a bit busy over the past couple of weeks. But ideally, somebody with diabetes, particularly if they're taking medications, and especially if they're taking insulin to control it, they should speak to either their GP or their diabetes team at least 2 months before Ramadan to come up with a plan. Now, the reason is because we want to prevent the risk of their blood sugars going life-threateningly low and life-threateningly high. Okay, so look for signs and symptoms of hypo and hyperglycemia. So if your blood sugar levels are low, these are the symptoms. So if you get shaking, sweating, you get blurring of your vision, tingling of the lips, you're quite irritable or anxious and you're getting palpitations, these are signs that your blood sugar level is low. So check your blood sugar level immediately and break your fast. If you're fasting, break your fast and take something to raise your blood sugar levels. That could be a sugary drink or a glucose gel. Okay, so that's one thing. The sign that your blood sugar levels are too high and that you need to check it because of that is that you're excessively thirsty. You're going to the toilet more often, you're getting headaches and extreme tiredness. And something which is quite particular is you get this pear drop smell in your mouth, okay? And these are what we call ketones, okay? So these sort of pear drop, like a fruity kind of smell in your mouth, that would suggest that your blood sugar level is excessively high. And so to check it immediately. What I will say right now, which is very important because it's nice just to get hard and fast rules, is if your blood sugar level drops less than 4, break your fast immediately, okay? Or also if it goes higher than around 16.7, if it's higher than that, then break your fast immediately and seek medical help. The reason for why you want to break it when it's less than 4 is obvious. Your blood sugar level is very low. It can get dangerously low and you can end up in a coma. So have a sugary snack and then have a sandwich maybe after. When it's high, it can go into something called diabetic ketoacidosis, DKA. And again, diabetics may know about this. And that, again, is a life-threatening complication. And they should seek medical help immediately if that was to happen. So these are a few things about type 2 diabetics. More information, which will help anybody with diabetes, is test regularly during Ramadan. Always test your blood sugar levels regularly. And if you're testing now, test more regularly than you are. If you become dehydrated, and the signs of dehydration might be a bit easier to find, but I would suggest you break your fast immediately and have something to drink. That's be very important. If you start to feel unwell, disoriented, confused, if you collapse or faint, again, stop fasting, drink water, and then also test your blood sugar level. And if your blood sugar level is low, do something to treat your low blood sugar level, your hypoglycemic episode. And another thing is never stop your insulin. If you're taking insulin and you're fasting and you've decided to fast despite being high risk, because I know some people still do, then never stop your insulin. It's really important. And also make sure you speak to your diabetes team or your GP to see if they can change your medications around. Because as an example, if somebody came to me and they're taking a tablet called metformin, which is usually the first line medication we give to anybody with diabetes or type 2 diabetes, if they're taking it 3 times a day, what do you do? Because you've only got 2 times really where you could actually take your medications. I would probably suggest you take your morning dose, and then your afternoon and evening dose you combine with iftar. Okay, so that's a generic example. Everybody's cases is different. So this is why it's important to speak to your GP or speak to your diabetes team, because they can tailor it. In Ramadan, you're literally flipping your entire routine from day to night. So you're eating during the night and fasting during the day. So your insulin will have to be changed. Your medications will have to be changed. And that's very, very important. And the reason I'm talking about low blood sugar levels is because there was a very famous study, which is called the EPIDIAR study, and that showed that hospitalization increased in Ramadan by 7.5 times in type 2 diabetics because of hypoglycemia. Nearly 8 times the amount of people were going into hospital in Ramadan because of hypoglycemia. So it's very, very important. It's life-threatening. So it's important that you make a regime before you do anything like that. Other things I'd say, like again, hard and fast rules. With diabetes, like I said, there's a gray area. You have to speak to your healthcare professional and tailor your medication regime around them. There's no denying that. But there are some rules that I would suggest. Is if you ever had a severe hypo episode 3 months prior to Ramadan, then I would say you must not fast. Okay, not without speaking to any healthcare professional. You must not fast. Another one is if you've had the DKA or HHS, which I talked about before. Again, a couple of months or 3 months prior to Ramadan starting, you shouldn't fast. I would say you must not fast. Okay, you must not fast. It's too dangerous for you to be fasting without seeking any healthcare support within that interim. If you constantly get hypos, low blood sugar levels, don't fast. Okay, if you're type 1 diabetic and it's poorly controlled, you must not fast. If you're type 1 diabetic and it's well controlled, you still shouldn't be fasting, because you're on insulin and your regime is going to be a bit more complicated than compared to somebody with type 2 diabetes usually. If you're pregnant and you've got diabetes, I would say you mustn't fast again as well. And if you've got other health conditions which are related to your fasting, like you've got blindness because of your diabetes, you've got what we call neuropathy, where you get tingling and sort of reduced sensation in your hands and in your feet because of your diabetes. All of these suggest your diabetes is poorly controlled, because these things wouldn't have happened otherwise. And I would say you shouldn't fast, in that case.
I'm actually quite, I don't want to say relieved in the sense of it's a good thing, but the study that you quoted of how much the numbers of hospitalizations rise in Ramadan, I think this needs to be really, really considered by people, because there is such a common prevailing mentality in our communities that I'm going to fast anyway. I will get more reward because it's difficult. And, subhanAllah, Allah doesn't ask us to make ourselves sick while fasting, subhanAllah. And obviously diabetes, the complications for diabetes can be life-threatening, and people should be considering that if that's something that they suffer with. So Jazakallah khair for being so detailed in your answer. The same person has sent a follow-up question, which actually I'm a little bit concerned about, because although it is technically, I think, a fiqh question, I think, Dr. Akmal, you might have something to say about this, because she's saying, I'm always thirsty. So this is the person with type 2 diabetes, and they're saying, I'm always thirsty. Can I rinse my mouth with water as long as I don't swallow any? Also, I'm planning to get up at dark to take my medications and then start to fast when it's light. Is this all right? So there's a it's the thirst thing that has sort of piqued my attention. Absolutely. What would you say about that?
Yeah, absolutely, Amanda. Yeah. So essentially, if somebody's constantly thirsty to the point where they've noticed it to such a degree, this would possibly suggest that their diabetes is poorly controlled and that their blood sugar levels are very high. Because as you rightly say, you picked up on the fact that I mentioned earlier, where if you have hyperglycemic episodes where your blood sugar is very high, one of the signs and symptoms of that is increased thirst. So it's important that they get their diabetes checked if they're listening, and to get their blood sugar levels checked, because it could suggest that the diabetes is very poorly controlled.
Okay.
And I've also noticed that they said that they're going to swap their medications around. It's very dangerous to do that without seeking any help. So they said that they're just going to switch their medications at night instead of the day. But then that could be very dangerous if they do that without getting the right help as well.
So whoever sent this question in, please do speak to your diabetes team or your GP as a matter of urgency. What about, though, in general, Sheikh Bilal, the general question about if you're thirsty, can you rinse your mouth out with water? Like, let's say somebody who isn't diabetic, so we're not talking about the diabetes concern here, but if the weather is hot, I know we have a heat wave predicted for April, if it's hot, is it okay to rinse your mouth out with water as long as you don't swallow any?
Yep, absolutely. It's fine to do, and it's not makruh or disliked to do either as well. Even if you're not making wudu or ghusl, it's perfectly fine to rinse your mouth out with water, obviously making sure you don't swallow any of it.
Okay, the third question then. Is there any sunnah which advises us on which food to eat before and after fasting? I'm underweight and I'm afraid of losing weight during Ramadan.
No, there's no sunnah about which food you can eat. Obviously, these things are based on cultural differences, and the Sharia has left it open. So obviously the Messenger of Allah ate the food that was available to him at his time. So there's no religious reward in eating particular types of food. The only thing is the Messenger of Allah used to break his fast with dates. In the Hanafi school, I have read that this is not something that's particularly religiously rewarding. So according to the Hanafi texts, so they say something sweet just because the person is, been fasting all day, and that will give them energy for that reason, but not because the Prophet had dates. So they actually say it's not a particularly religiously rewarding, which might surprise a lot of people to break their fast with dates. Even though the Prophet did that, the Hanafi texts are saying that there's no particular religious reward involved in that. Okay, but some of the other schools, they do incline towards there being a type of religious reward in breaking your fast with dates.
That's interesting, because that's, what I've always been taught is that anything that the Prophet, peace be upon him, did habitually, if we do it with the intention of following his example, there's a reward in it, regardless of what it is. Yeah, but you're saying that the Hanafi school says not necessarily.
No, so they have a debate in the books of the principles of fiqh.
Okay.
That the Prophet, where they mention that the Prophet doing something doesn't necessarily mean that there's a reward in doing that thing. And they use a hadith where the Messenger of Allah enters the mosque, and they used to pray in the sandals inside the mosque at that time. But this time the Prophet took his sandals off, put them next to him and prayed. And everybody else saw him doing that, and they did the same. And then after the prayer, the Messenger said, "Why did you take your sandals off?" And they said, "Well, we saw you doing it, O Messenger of Allah." And he said, "That's because Jibreel told me there were some impurities on them, so I took them off." So they use that as an argument that the actions of the Prophet, they don't necessarily indicate any type of religious command for us.
Okay, that's interesting. Jazakallah khair for that. Dr. Ahmed, what would you say about the weight issue, though? This person is afraid of losing weight and is already underweight. How can that be avoided in Ramadan?
It's if somebody's already has a sort of predisposition to losing weight, then Ramadan might be difficult. I wouldn't say that it's anything that would stop them from fasting. However, it's important to get their calories in when they have their iftar and suhoor. I don't normally say that, but but it's important that they get their calories in, inshallah. And getting protein, that would be good for them. Again, that's not to say to overeat, because they just get bloated and feel horrible, and they just won't end up eating very much at sahur because it's so close together, the timings now. But yes, if they just get their calories in, stay hydrated, and then hopefully, inshallah, they should be okay during Ramadan.
When you say stay hydrated, how much fluid should we be taking during the non-fasting hours usually?
I would say for somebody who's not got any other medical conditions, I would say around 2 liters. 2 liters during that time would be ideal. Okay, that would be ideal. Some people will have fluid restriction in their diet. For example, just off the top of my head, I can think of patients with heart failure. They might be restricted with how much fluid they can take during a day. They might be restricted to 1 liter or 1.5 liters a day. So if they've already got that in place, and they shouldn't go to excess. But generally, it's really important to stay hydrated during Ramadan, particularly when there's going to be a heat wave. Yeah.
I think a lot of us have this habit, which we probably need to work on, of drinking most of those 2 liters at suhoor time, just before the Fajr prayer. What would you say about that from a medical standpoint? Is there any danger to doing that other than constantly visiting the bathroom afterwards?
The problem is when you have you have so much water all at once, is you're not going to be able to get your food in. Okay, you might not be able to have the other nutrition, because you'll just be bloated and full because of the water that you're drinking. Just practically, so for example, if you're going to pray the Taraweeh, take a bottle of water with you then, and just drink it in between each raka'ah. And then just after you finish praying, you can maybe have a little bit more to drink. And then again at suhoor, and you're also drinking at iftar. So just to balance it all the way through, that would be better.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. Let's go to the next question then. Somebody has written in, I work night shifts, so I'm sleeping most of the fasting hours, and I can't attend the night prayers in the mosque. How can I get any rewards this month, as I'm not really fasting or worshipping? Sheikh Bilal, I think this one is for you.
Yes. So just because you're sleeping doesn't mean that you're not fasting. So you will still be rewarded for the fast, even if you're sleeping. And especially in your situation here, where you're actually working, so you have to sleep. And as for the Taraweeh prayers, for those people who don't know what Taraweeh prayers are, these are additional voluntary prayers that are done in the night time of Ramadan. Usually they're done as 20 units of additional prayers after the Isha prayer, after the night prayers in Ramadan. So you see Muslims doing that every night throughout Ramadan. And they're voluntary prayers, so they're not obligatory for you to do, so you shouldn't feel guilty that you're missing out on them or you're losing any type of reward. And maybe you can make up for them by doing extra prayers during the day if you want to, or giving extra charity in the month of Ramadan. So there are many ways you can get rewards in the month of Ramadan. The most important thing, obviously, is the fasting.
Okay, so it still counts as fasting even if you're asleep?
Yeah, it still counts as fasting even if you're asleep.
Alhamdulillah, good. The next question, subhanAllah, I know quite a lot of sisters who are asking this right now. My family doesn't know that I've converted to Islam yet, so they don't know that I'm Muslim, and they would probably kick me out if they did know. How can I fast without them knowing?
Might be better for you to answer this. I don't know if you've ever been in this situation.
I haven't been myself. I know sisters who have been, and it's been very challenging because, especially if you're living at home, if you're living with your parents, they will notice that you're not eating anything, and they will notice that there's, they've been sort of paranoid about leaving dishes in the sink after suhoor and waking anyone up at 4 a.m. when they get up to eat. So it can be a challenging one. I mean, one sister who I know, she was working during the day. So alhamdulillah, that went under the radar that she wasn't eating while at work. And she would, on her way home, buy like a meal deal from a supermarket and have that for her iftar and have another one for her suhoor. And she would keep them in her room. And that way she would have food available to her. But it was very, very stressful.
I think a way around it, there are a lot of, there are some non-Muslims who do fast in Ramadan, just because they're interested in Islam, or want to take part, or just see what it's like, or they might be doing it for charity purposes as well.
That's true.
So, maybe you could do it as a charity thing that, I'm going to fast Ramadan and, raise some funds maybe, or there are ways around it without openly coming out and saying that you're Muslim, or just say I'm experimenting with my diet. So there are ways you can get around it without openly saying that you're a Muslim, I think.
Yeah, you could. I mean, also look at intermittent fasting is such a popular thing nowadays. You could maybe just say that that's what you're doing. I'm doing intermittent fasting. If your family members are very hostile towards any mention of Islam, pass it off as intermittent fasting. You could do that. If you are truly in a situation where it would be risky to do that, I think that would be one way you could get around it, maybe, inshallah. And may Allah make it easy for anybody in this situation. It's a very difficult situation to be in.
If I just say something, it actually reminded me about something that I was thinking about with diabetes. Sorry, this issue, because it's not something that I would have considered actually, but now that you mention it, but the issue with, if you're fasting, for example, with diabetes or with a medical condition, and if you're in a situation like this, is that it's important somebody should know that you're fasting, whether it's a friend or something, just because if something was to happen, then they would know that this is probably the reason why. They can just quickly give a sugary snack if somebody's like not comatose, but like just a bit lucid because of this. Then it's important that they know. Some people might have be on steroids or something, some sort of medication that can cause a crisis if they weren't to take it. Then if somebody was to know they were fasting, it would be helpful. But I understand that this is a very difficult and sensitive topic for many people, and it is very personal for people to decide. Yeah.
Sheikh Bilal, would there be any situation such as this where one could be considered exempt from fasting?
The only time they'd be exempt completely from fasting, I guess, is if they fear some type of physical harm, real fear of some severe harm that will come to them because of that fast. But the problem here is not the fast, it's them finding out that they're a Muslim.
Yes, yeah.
It can be, there are workarounds here.
Let's move on to the next question then. Somebody's written in saying, I know that I can't fast when I'm on my menses, but what do I do when it stops in the middle of the day? Do I start fasting? Do I keep eating? If I start fasting, does that day count? I think this was brought up on one of the new beginnings groups the other day, wasn't it? And I know that quite a few of the sisters were quite confused. So I think it would be good if we could address this issue.
Yeah, so if it stops, that day will not count as a fast. So you wouldn't say you were fasting because half of the day has gone when you weren't fasting. So you have to make up that day anyway. So the question is, do I refrain from food and drink and sexual intercourse just for the sake of the day of Ramadan? Well, there is a ruling that is mentioned in the Hanafi school in particular about this. Some schools, they said it's recommended for a woman to refrain from eating or drinking sexual intercourse if her menses stop during the daytime of fasting. The Hanafi school, there is a ruling where they say it's obligatory for her to do that. And the reason they said this is because of the sanctity of the month of Ramadan. And when you delve deeper into, the reasoning behind it, they mention social reasons that people might start getting a bad opinion of her or making allegations about her and so on. And because everybody's fasting, it's about being in that spirit and not eating and drinking as well when she's not menstruating. So it seems to me that it's more of a social rule. And I personally, and other Hanafi scholars may disagree, but I personally don't see it applying in non-Muslim lands.
Okay.
In Muslim lands, some Muslim lands, they have strict rules as well about eating and drinking in public in Ramadan. Well, maybe in Muslim lands, I would say yes, but personally, I don't see it applying in in non-Muslim lands.
I think this brings up another question, which I know a lot of sisters struggle with. There is an idea, and I don't know if it's based Islamically or culturally, that even if a woman is on her menses, she should not eat and drink in front of anybody, especially male members of her family or any men who she might come across, because then they would know. And sometimes it's presented to some of us as though, it's not allowed to eat and drink in front of other people in Ramadan when you're not fasting, because they will know that you're on your monthly cycle. Is there an Islamic basis for this, or is this a cultural thing?
It seems to be cultural. I'm not too sure because I haven't obviously studied every single text in every school. There may be something in some schools that say this. The reading in the Hanafi school is that it's actually prohibited for a woman not to eat when she's menstruating, because she's sort of like imitating a woman who's fasting when she's not actually eligible to fast. So they actually say she shouldn't imitate a woman who's fasting. Quite strict on it, and say she could be sinful for doing that, for imitating a woman who's fasting.
She could be sinful for doing that.
Yeah. So they were quite strict, when they mentioned that. So I don't think, according to the Hanafi school anyway, they would, recommend a woman to do that, according to my understanding.
Okay, that's good to know. Jazakallah khair. The next question, somebody writes, I am recovering from anorexia and I'm worried that I'll relapse in Ramadan. What can I do to avoid this? Dr. Akmal, that's definitely a question for you.
I think this is the issue of mental health now in Ramadan. Ramadan, you're not eating and drinking. You're not engaging in sort of the habits that you might have engaged in outside of Ramadan. And it's important to recognize that you're changing your behavior, your thoughts, and your devotional practices. And this can take a toll on an individual mentally. The issue when I was sort of researching around mental health and Ramadan particularly is a lot of the studies have been done in very Muslim majority countries. For example, let's talk about self-harm and suicide. Now, it would suggest that studies would suggest that Ramadan is actually a protective factor, and that the rates of self-harm and suicide and parasuicidal incidents in Ramadan actually decreases in these studies. But that can also be suggested to be as a result of the societal sort of condition at the time. There's greater social support networks and people coming together to help. Now, for example, if you're not in that kind of society and not in them kind of networks, that data might not be able to, you might not be able to extrapolate that data for it to be relevant here. So I would say that it's very important to be careful if you have got mental health issues, and and to make sure that you're constantly talking to somebody, and that there is a support and there is a friend that you can speak to if you are going down. The issue of now eating disorders is, again, a very difficult one to deal with, because there's such a spectrum of this. I think the question, if somebody's just recovering from anorexia, I'm just going to go off what I can understand from the question. If they're recovering from anorexia, I would presume that they've recently maybe had issues with this in the recent past, as opposed to sometime a long time ago where they're stable. And if they're already worrying about relapsing in Ramadan, then this is a red flag to me. And I would say that somebody with anorexia or even bulimia, severe anorexia or bulimia, I would suggest that it's probably safe. It's probably not safe to fast, because the issues can be quite detrimental. Like physically, you can become very severely dehydrated, and you can become very severely unwell as a result of this. And it's not just the physical symptoms. Mentally, you can go into a crisis. Okay, and the consequences of that would mean that you might not ever have a Ramadan again. So that's what I would suggest personally, that for somebody who has severe anorexia or bulimia, whether it's purging by vomiting or laxative abuse or whatever it is, that for that person, I would say that it's better not to. And the reason is because there is small amounts of data that for people who have pre-existing enhanced vulnerability to eating disorders, that they do actually relapse in Ramadan, that there is a small amount of data which suggests that Ramadan can trigger that. So in that particular case, I would say that it's probably that they shouldn't fast. If I was to be clear, I would say that they shouldn't fast. If somebody's got a mental health problem and they're stable with it, they've not relapsed within the past year, maybe, then I would say that yes, they can fast, and that it's fine to fast, and that it's okay to fast, and there shouldn't be a problem. But that's also with the sort of added support that they may have, that somebody knows that they're fasting and that there's somebody to check up on them. Otherwise, I would say that it's not safe to do so. I would say it's not, because the risk of like the electrolyte imbalance and things. I would say that they shouldn't fast.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. The questions that we've been sent in really sort of run the gamut of jumping back and forth between topics. The next one is for you, Sheikh Bilal. How can I pray Taraweeh by myself when I only know 2 surahs? What would you recommend?
You can do it on your own. Even some of the companions, they would pray the Taraweeh prayers on your own. Just to repeat, the Taraweeh prayers, these are additional prayers that are done in the night time of Ramadan that are voluntary prayers, and they're usually done as 20 units instead of 2s. So you can do it, but it just means that you're reciting the same surah in each unit of prayer now. And if you are following some other schools of law, like the Shafi school in particular, what you can do is you can read from the Quran itself, from the text. So you can hold the Quran whilst you're in the prayer, or put it on the stand in front of you and read immediately from the Quran. So obviously that takes some knowledge of the Arabic language.
So I know that in a lot of mosques, when you go for these night prayers, they tend to, the first night of Ramadan, start at the beginning of the Quran, and by the end of Ramadan, they have finished reciting the whole Quran in those prayers. But that's not a requirement, is what you're saying. So we're not required to read the Quran from front to back during the night prayers in Ramadan.
Right, yeah. So the question may be indicating towards that, this concept of having to recite the entire Quran in these Taraweeh prayers, completing the entire Quran in these Taraweeh prayers. It's a sunnah to do. It's something that is recommended to do. However, the scholars have mentioned, and these are scholars from 900 years ago, 800 years ago, who were saying this, not our day and age. They have mentioned that if it is too much for people to handle, if it causes people to be put off from the prayer, if the prayers are becoming too long for people, and, numbers are dwindling, like we always see, a drop off in the middle of Ramadan, then the imam should not recite the full Quran in these prayers, and he should rather just recite short chapters of the Quran, and that will encourage more people to attend the prayer. And it's a lot easier for people. And I think especially in the UK, the nights are extremely short. And alhamdulillah, they're getting a bit longer now because Ramadan is moving away from the summer. But in the summertime, you really have very little time. Maghrib is like 9:30. You break your fast, you pray your Maghrib, then you're going to pray 6 units probably after that. Then you're going to have something to eat. Then you're going to go to the toilet, make wudu. Then it's the Isha prayer. And now you want to do 20 units of prayer, reciting the full Quran. And then the Witr prayer, and then there's collections, and then there's speeches. And by that time, it's like you time for your suhoor, your pre-dawn meal, and you're making wudu and getting ready for Fajr again. I find it really bizarre that, there are some mosques locally anyway that have started just reading short chapters. And they've been doing this for a few Ramadans now, instead of reciting the entire Quran in the Taraweeh. So, the scholars 800 years ago were saying, we don't even do this anymore. So I don't know what the obsession is with, some mosques with completing the entire Quran in the Taraweeh prayers in Ramadan.
In the summer, I mean, how many years ago was it when it was in June? Ramadan. It was not that long ago, 5 years ago. And this may trigger another question, but obviously there at that time of year, there are differences of opinion as to when the fast begins because of the lack of actual darkness in the sky. Yeah. And there were some mosques where I live where they said that Fajr was at 1:30 in the morning. Or no, Suhoor was at 1:30 in the morning, Fajr was at 2. So you literally had, with Isha starting at 11, 2 hours to get all of that in, and they were wanting to pray the 20 rakat, and the mosque I could go to does 8 rakat only, even in the winter. So, I went to one mosque that did that, and I thought, how are they cramming everything in?
It's really bizarre. And some of the classical scholars even went to the point in saying that even if somebody just recites the Fatiha and one verse of the Quran,
it's sufficient.
One verse.
Alhamdulillah.
I'll be happy with that in the Taraweeh prayers.
Alhamdulillah. It's about making it accessible, isn't it? Alhamdulillah. So, but to answer the question, you can do your Taraweeh with just the 2 surahs that you know. Repeat them and repeat them and repeat them. It doesn't matter. It's still valid. It's still acceptable. Alhamdulillah. Yeah. Good. Alhamdulillah. Excellent. So now the next question. Somebody's asking, if I can't fast due to medical reasons, can I do half a fast instead? What do I do? So they're asking, what do they do if they can't fast? Can they do half the day, quarter of the day?
No, you can't do half a fast. No, that wouldn't be permitted. So you can make it up in the winter time when the days are short.
Okay.
But medical reasons, that raises a lot of questions. So me as an imam, as a scholar, I'm not allowed to give you medical advice because I'm not qualified to give you medical advice. I can tell you if the fast is valid or not, but when it comes to medical advice, that is not my forte. And you shouldn't be taking medical advice from your imam or your taxi driver or,
Don't do it.
Your brother-in-law or whatever. You should be going to the experts. And that's what Islam says. You go to the experts when it's needs an expert opinion in that particular field.
So as an expert in the rules of Islam, which you are, mashallah, let's say that somebody has gone to Dr. Akmal and he's told them, no, you can't fast. Your diabetes is out of control. No way you should fast. It will be very dangerous. And this person has come to you now, Sheikh, and they're saying, what do I do instead? Okay, I can't fast at all, even in the winter. What do I do instead?
If this person can never ever fast ever, we have what's called the fidya. So fidya is it literally means a ransom in Arabic. So it's something that is in replace of the fast that you do. So the fidya can be paid for each fast that the person has missed to a poor person. It's the same estimation as what we pay for zakat al-fitr. People know zakat al-fitr or sadaqat al-fitr. And it was, the Messenger of Allah said, give wheat. It's like a container of wheat or a container of dates or barley and so on. It's probably about, 2 or 3 pounds at the least. Obviously, a container of dates is like a, 2-litre container of dates. Could go up to like 10 or 15 pounds. So it's in that range. So you can give a few quid, to cover that, the fidya, the compensation for that fast. But this is only if there is no chance of you ever being able to fast.
Ever. Or like if somebody is unable to fast for the foreseeable future, but they could potentially be cured of whatever it is that's preventing them from fasting. Do they pay the fidya anyway, or should they wait until a time where they may be able to fast, even if that's in a few years?
Yeah, so the scenario mentioned in the Quran is with the Sheikh al-Fani, basically, which is a very old person who has no hope of ever being able, because once you reach a certain age and you're able to fast, that's it. There's no chance in the future that they will be able to do that.
Okay.
So with things like medical things, I don't know about diabetes. How far away from a cure, Dr. Akmal?
You can cure your type 2 diabetes before it gets too bad. Not your type 1 though, but your type 2 you definitely can.
So I think, just depends on, do they have strong belief that there's no chance of being able to fast in the future, even in the winter? If that's the case, then they can pay the fidya.
And so just to clarify, the fidya is, it can be paid cash. It doesn't have to be paid
in monetary value.
Okay. And so how much is it? If it's a monetary value, let's say that
I think
whoever you're doing.
£5, £5, £5 to £10 is a good
for
amount.
the whole month.
No, for each fast.
For each day.
For each day, yeah.
So if you're saying that it's £5, that's about £150 for the month if you can't fast for the whole month.
That's right. But this needs to go to individual poor people as well.
So you need to give it directly to a poor person.
It can't go to all of those 30 days, can't just go in one go to a poor person. So if the poor person comes back every day and you give them that amount, or maybe you can say you have breakfast and dinner at my house, that might work. So if the poor person comes back every day and you pay that amount, that will be fine. Otherwise, you need to give it to 30 poor people. Yeah.
Would it be acceptable? I'm just thinking there is one of my local mosques that serves in their local community. It's largely asylum seekers and refugees because of where they're located. And they only serve iftar meals for these people. They don't give it to the general community. So would it be acceptable to say donate your fidya to that mosque because you know that they're feeding people in need?
So it would have to be breakfast and dinner or suhoor and iftar.
Okay.
Have to be both of them.
Okay.
It may work. And
I assume you have to flag it to the mosque that what you're paying is fidya so they know how to use it.
Yeah.
Okay.
They do have to do that, yeah.
Okay.
I think a lot of the Islamic charities, they do have like an option where you can actually select this is for the fidya for fasting.
Okay, that's good to know.
You pay online to some charities, they do have that option.
And so they handle the distribution and everything for you.
That's right, yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Let's move on to the next question then. Somebody has written in, this will be my first time fasting. What do people eat to not get hungry? How do people manage? When I read this question, my initial reaction was, not get hungry? That it's not possible.
Yeah.
But okay, maybe we should rephrase it. What can we eat in order to not be fainting and having mood swings and brain fog during the day?
So I could probably say a few things like sort of like a recommended diet, maybe, or recommended foods that might be helpful.
I think that would be useful. Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, it'd be you'd want to have slow releasing food, as in if you're going to do it, regardless, you're going to get hungry in Ramadan, like we said. Like it's not going to be easy, and you could probably argue it's not really meant to be easy. That's the whole. It's the idea of sacrifice. But you can do things to make it a bit easier upon yourself. So you can have slow releasing foods, porridge, lentils, beans, whole grain rice, whole grain bread. These are good foods. They're slow releasing, so then they'll give you energy over a long period of time. That would be really helpful. So that would be very good for suhoor, for example. That would actually be quite good for suhoor, having like porridge and oats and things. For iftar, a handful of dates. Again, this is not for diabetics, but they just general advice, right? So like a handful of dates is very good. It is good to have, because it gives you that energy. Particularly if your sugar levels have dropped during the day, you can have some dates, and that would really give you that energy, like Sheikh Bilal mentioned at the start. And water, that would be very good. One thing I would avoid, and it's saturated fats, like ghee, samosas, pakoras. Have a little bit, enjoy yourselves. You have been fasting for about 17 hours, 18 hours maybe, I don't know. So you just enjoy yourself, but in moderation. Okay, so that's very important, and it won't do anything for your hunger. If you have that at suhoor time, it's not going to help you in the long run. All that'll happen is you just end up putting weight on in Ramadan, and you won't lose it. So yeah, Ramadan is it's a difficult time. These are the kind of foods that you can have that will help you. Stay hydrated. That's the key thing. Stay hydrated. These whole grain foods are very good for you, but just accept that it might be a little bit difficult.
What about caffeine? Drinks like tea and coffee. I've heard different things. So
yeah,
one is the caffeine can make you more dehydrated, but then having a cup of tea or coffee, it's getting some liquids.
So. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So that's people who are big coffee drinkers and tea drinkers will struggle in Ramadan. Because they will, for the first week at least, if not longer, you will start getting headaches. And you will feel quite lethargic because your body's adapting to this low caffeine diet. But then after a week or 2 weeks, you will adapt, And maybe after Ramadan, you might realize, you know what, I need to cut my habit off, because it's not natural to be wanting something that much. In terms of keeping you hydrated, you know, there is obviously water in there and stuff, and that will give you some hydration. But the caffeine it will get you dehydrated in the long term, because you know, it will definitely do that. So I would avoid it as much as possible, in the build up to Ramadan, just so that you don't have that caffeine crash when you start fasting.
Another person reminding me about my coffee habit.
I'm a tea drinker.
I have to admit, my coffee habit is such that I have coffee at iftar and at suhoor.
Yeah, if you need.
But
I
also drink a lot of water, so you know, yeah, I can't give it up. And I'm always so impressed, mashallah, by people I know who like wean themselves off about the month before Ramadan. I don't know how they do it. This is a medical question. She's asking, I'm 5 months into a high-risk pregnancy. It's high risk because my first child was born premature. This is the second subsequent pregnancy. She needs to know how to fast while pregnant.
I can tell you medically. So in terms of fasting in pregnancy, there's an ikhtilaf amongst the doctors as well and the scientists.
For those who don't know, what's ikhtilaf?
Oh yeah, sorry. There's a difference of opinion, and you know the data isn't so great as is the case with many of the things in Ramadan. But in terms of medically, however, in theory, so if you're in the first trimester, you know, and let's say, for example, which is like the first 12 weeks of your pregnancy, particularly in the first 8 weeks, there's a process called embryogenesis which is going on now, which refers to the development and formation of the embryo with establishment of all the systems and organs. Okay, so this is key. This first 8 weeks is key. Now, in theory, you know, the baby is potentially vulnerable at this point. Okay, and exposure to nutritional deficiencies and low blood sugar levels like hypoglycemia, etc., due to Ramadan fasting can have detrimental effects. Okay, and this actual hypothesis was tested in some animal studies and fasting during this period of embryogenesis, and it did show increased rates of miscarriage. It did show reduced birth weight, and also alterations in ossification, alterations in sort of the way your bones are formed. And again, I will highlight that this is in some animal studies, and the data it's not incredibly strong. There were some small studies in Iran in 2010, and they compared fasting versus non-fasting women in the first trimester, which did suggest fetal growth restriction. Okay, so that there was that. But then the studies were repeated again in Netherlands and Indonesia, I think 2015, 2018, and which didn't show any differences in birth weight. But like I said, the data isn't so clear in this period. So that's the first trimester. Now, if you go past this and you're going towards the later part of your pregnancy, you know, the second and third trimester, the data is actually more reassuring. And as long as patients are fasting safely, the outcomes were actually good, you know. And there are some studies, again, the data is small, which suggested that maternal health improved when they were fasting, like that the blood sugar levels were controlled, they were losing weight, and that was actually good. But like I said, if they're fasting safely and there's no other underlying medical problems, then it was actually safe to fast. So if I was to give like a hard and fast rule again, I would say that like a very high risk pregnancy, you know, if you're pregnant and you have severe underlying mental health, medical conditions, maternal, so talk about the mother now, or if you have a complicated pregnancy, then I would say you must not fast. In this case, you wouldn't fast at all. If it's an uncomplicated pregnancy and the mother is well but you're in the first trimester, because of the sort of the data that I've discussed, I would say that you shouldn't fast. And that if you are going to fast despite that, and I know some people will, is maybe you just try like intermittent fasting, 1 day off, 1 day on, or something like that. But really, you shouldn't be fasting, and you can just make it up later. But if you have got other medical conditions which are moderately severe, I would say, you know, you shouldn't fast as well. in terms of when you can fast medically now, is if you're, again, in an uncomplicated pregnancy, mother is fine, there's no risk to baby or anything like that, and you're in the second and third trimester, and so you're not in your first trimester, basically, then I would say it's safe. It's medically safe to fast. Okay.
So this sister is in her 5th month, she's saying. So what's
she's probably
25 weeks?
20, probably about 22, I think. 23,
22?
Somewhere
Okay.
in the middle, yeah. I would say that if she's not got any other medical conditions, it might, I would say in this case, that she shouldn't fast.
Okay.
Only because her first baby was premature, and I wouldn't want to risk anything again with that. So in that case, I think there's a decent enough reason to say that it's better for her not to fast in this case.
Okay.
Yeah, that's in general. That's what I would say about pregnancy.
Okay. To follow up from the fiqh point of view, Sheikh Bilal, the same sister has written that her mother-in-law says that she has to fast and that she'll get extra reward because it's difficult for her. Is that true? So it's the same sister, 5 months into a high-risk pregnancy, and her mother-in-law is saying to her, no, you have to fast, but don't worry, you get extra reward for it.
No, that's not correct whatsoever. In fact, the Quran actually negates all of that. So if we look at the verses of fasting in the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, after Allah commands us to fast, and he says, if you are traveling or on a journey, then make them up from later days.
Mm-hmm.
And the verse that comes after it, it says, Inna Allah yuridu bikum al-yus, wa la yuridu bikum al-us. That Allah, He wants ease for you. He doesn't want difficulty for you.
SubhanAllah.
So, the goal is not to, cause harm or make things difficult for you or cause harm to yourself. We will get hungry. There is some type of effort that needs to be put into it. But when it comes to causing harm to yourself, the Sharia came here to remove all harm. So, if fasting is doing that to you, then you definitely should not be fasting. So sometimes in the Muslim community, because, Ramadan is such a big thing and there's a taboo about not fasting and, oh my God, I don't want to not fast in Ramadan. But no, if it's causing you harm, then you should not be fasting, definitely. One woman, she came to me and she said, when I fast in Ramadan, I actually get so ill that I'm taken into hospital. And she said that she keeps trying it every year, but, and it's like, it's actually prohibited for you to even attempt to fast if that is the case. It's prohibited for you to even attempt to fast. So you're causing harm to yourself.
Not just that there's no reward or no extra reward. It's actually
the opposite. Yeah,
the opposite. Subhanallah.
Because we'd be, Allah's, command us to look after our bodies. Our bodies they're a trust that Allah's given to us whilst we're on this earth. And we are not allowed to abuse that trust. So we have to look after it.
What would you advise in this case? This isn't something that somebody's written in, but I'm just thinking of the etiquette around dealing with well-meaning but misinformed members of the community who are putting in their tuppence as to your ability or inability to fast, putting pressure on you, especially as a new Muslim. I've experienced this. I remember when I was expecting with my children and being told something very similar. No, you don't have a reason not to fast. And alhamdulillah, I didn't get ill, but the pressure to fast, even when I was absolutely exhausted, was so great. And yet at the same time, you don't want to be disrespecting somebody if it's an in-law or an extended family member. How can you deal with this? What would you advise in terms of diplomacy with family members who are sort of trying to force it on you?
Yeah, you have to be diplomatic if you're in a family setting. It is a difficult situation. What I would say is that they should consult scholars and say, I've spoken to this scholar and I've spoken to my doctor, and they said that this is what I should or shouldn't be doing in relation to fasting. And you should just leave it at that, really. You said these are the experts. I've consulted them. and they're telling me I shouldn't be fasting. And that's what I'm going to go with, respectfully. But, this is how it is.
Yeah, may Allah make it easy for everybody facing that. Next question is one for you, doctor. I have a bowel disease, and last year I couldn't fast, which made me very depressed. So I'm going to try this year. What do I need to tell my doctor so that they can assess my ability to fast? Okay. I think they're going on the assumption that the doctor probably doesn't know what fasting entails. So
yeah. So the term, a bowel disease could be anything. It could be as something like IBS. It could be peptic ulcer disease or reflux, or it could be something like inflammatory bowel disease. I think usually when somebody says bowel disease, they tend to mean inflammatory bowel disease, which is because that's the term that we use. Because if they were saying reflux, they'd say reflux. If they had an ulcer, they'd say that.
Yeah. Okay.
Generally, if you, I'll tackle the second part of the question. What do I need to tell my doctor so they can assess my ability? I think what a doctor will need to know is they'll need to know timings of the fast.
Okay.
They'll need to know that, and they should know already the medications that the patient takes, because they'll have to alter the doses and they'll have to alter when they should take the medications. If somebody can get to their doctor, that's fantastic, because most people don't before Ramadan. But if they can do that, that's ideal, and the doctor will tailor their medications that they need during this period. In terms of in terms of bowel disease, if I can speak generally about it. So if somebody's got reflux, for example, then I would say it's absolutely fine to fast, but just don't miss out, the medications that you take to control it. Just have it at night time, or probably better to have it at suhoor as well. Have it at iftar or suhoor, doesn't matter really. Iftar would be good as well, actually. And the reason is because then you just won't get as symptomatic. It won't be dangerous to your health to fast, but you might just not have a very good quality of life because you'll be quite symptomatic with it. Beyond that, I would also say if it's inflammatory bowel disease, which is, for example, your Crohn's disease or your ulcerative colitis, okay, then it can get a bit messy. So if you are in an acute flare, so for example, if you have you're quite symptomatic and you have active disease at that point, then you shouldn't be fasting, okay? And you should take your treatment to control that flare, whether that's steroids or anything else. You should not fast, and you should get treatment promptly and recover. If you're in a period of remission, or you're not got any symptoms and it's well controlled, even if you've got immunosuppressants with Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, it's safe to fast, okay. And it's fine to do so. In fact, actually, I was reading a study earlier. It's just something from my own reading but it's currently in study at the moment. It's the data is not published there yet, but there is evidence that you have intestinal regeneration and you have positive, so you have good bacteria and bad bacteria in your gut, and so the protective gut microbiome is actually increased when you're fasting as well. So this can be all beneficial things in inflammatory bowel disease. So if you're not in sort of any active symptoms with your IBD and it's well controlled, and you're not in an acute flare and you're in remission, then it's absolutely safe to fast. This, even if you've got immunosuppressants. But like I said, it's important that you let your doctor know that you are going to fast, because they'll change your medications around and they'll tell you whether it's safe to do so. So hopefully that's I'm hoping that was what they were asking, and I apologize if that's not what they meant by bowel disease.
Okay, well, Jazakallah khair. Obviously, we can only respond to the questions as they're worded, so to the best of our ability. And I don't think it bears mentioning that any medical advice should be clarified with one's own GP, as they know all of the details of your particular health problems. Okay, the next question then. Both my husband and I are exempt from fasting due to chronic illness, and we pay charity instead, which would be the fidya that was mentioned earlier. We attend the mosque for night prayers, and we try to make more dhikr and read Quran in the daytime. Are we allowed to be intimate during the day, or is that not allowed at all in Ramadan? If we avoid it during the day, do we get reward? So they're not fasting. They're exempt from fasting. Are they allowed to be intimate with each other during the day, or is that prohibited?
No, there's no prohibition here if the person is not fasting.
Okay.
As for avoiding it and getting reward, I haven't come across that in any of the texts, that it's more rewardable to do that if you're not fasting, and you're exempt from fasting anyway.
Okay. I think there are quite a few people who, even though they're exempt from fasting, they want to restrict themselves from something to get the atmosphere of fasting. Perhaps this is where this question comes from.
Yeah, it seems that way, but I don't see it as being any extra reward for doing that.
Okay.
So some Muslims, I will add, that they also believe that intimacy during the night time is not permitted. So there are some Muslims who believe that, which is not true whatsoever. So in the night time, it's perfectly fine to be intimate.
And if you're exempt from fasting, if both the husband and wife are exempt from fasting, they're not restricted in this.
Yeah,
okay. Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair for that. We've come to the final question, which I think is the question that I hear most often every single year.
It's the biggie.
Can I brush my teeth while I'm fasting? Sheikh Bilal, we had to include it.
The short answer is yes, you can. However, the scholars have said that it is disliked to do so because there's a chance that you may swallow some of that toothpaste whilst you're fasting. So there are two scenarios. You brush your teeth without any toothpaste on, which is fine anyway. So the Messenger used to use the miswak, which is like a toothpaste made out of a root of a tree. Mm-hmm. Okay, and he would brush his teeth with that whilst fasting, even if it's moist, okay, or it's been soaked in water, that's fine for you to use. So if you have a toothbrush that doesn't have any toothpaste on, mm-hmm. even if you wet it and brush your teeth that way, that's perfectly fine. Okay, so and there's no dislike in that whatsoever. If you are using toothpaste, here is where the scholars have said it's disliked.
Okay.
Obviously, you need to spit that toothpaste out, but it is disliked because number one, you're tasting something that you don't really need to taste, and there's a risk that you may break the fast. So for those reasons, you consider it as disliked. People have asked me, I need to go to work, have meetings, with people, and, my breath, the odor of my breath changes as well. So that would probably override that dislike. I would say overrides the dislike, if that's the case.
So in that case, it's not a problem. You can use the toothpaste.
It's not a problem, and okay. It wouldn't be disliked if there is a need, because there's a overriding need here. Another option could be mouthwash as well. They can rinse the mouth and spit that out. What I normally do is I brush my teeth after the pre-dawn meal, mm-hmm. and when I break my fast, I'll use toothpaste at those times. Mm-hmm. Try to avoid using it during the day, and throughout the day I can just use the toothbrush without any toothpaste on.
Okay.
Usually that's fine.
What about, you mentioned the miswak, the sticks that you find people using. Mm-hmm. I've got a pile of them in a drawer somewhere that somebody gave me that are flavored. So they have mint flavoring, orange flavoring, lemon flavoring, things like that on them. I don't use them. They're not very nice, but would that impact the fast at all if you use those while you're fasting?
Possibly. The general rule that scholars have mentioned, it's disliked to taste something when you're fasting. But the context they speak about is a woman who's cooking, mm-hmm. Food. She might need to taste it to check the right amount of salt in it or whatever. Or somebody's buying honey. So somebody's buying honey and they need to check the quality of the honey. It's okay for them to taste. Or a woman needs to chew softened food to give to a baby. So here they say for those reasons, then it won't be disliked. Otherwise, if there is no reason, then it could be considered as disliked.
Well, that was our last question.
Well, sadly, we once again come to the end of our time. I'm sure we could definitely continue this topic on for a lot longer. There's so much to unpack.
There really is. Jazakallah khair to Dr. Akmal for joining us for this discussion and for all his advice. And of course, to all of our listeners for tuning in again.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for having me today. I've really enjoyed my time here, and I hope many people have benefited. I'd say it's important to stay hydrated. And if you have any medical conditions, it's important to speak to your GP and get a plan in place, because you'll be surprised at what you can and can't do in Ramadan. And even if you're been told in the past that you can't fast, maybe with some alterations, things can be done to help.
I hope you have a blessed Ramadan. If you're fasting for the first time, do not worry. It is daunting the first time. Remember when I was thinking about fasting first time, it is a bit daunting, and you're thinking about, oh my God, but once you start doing it and you get into the habit, you find that those fears were really silly. It's not as bad as we might think it to be.
Absolutely. And I think, subhanAllah, I've been fasting. This is going to be my 25th Ramadan, I guess. Alhamdulillah. And I always dread it. And then after the first 3 days, you get into the routine and the atmosphere comes, and it's such a beautiful month. So looking forward to it, inshallah. That's it for another episode of the New Beginnings podcast. We do hope you enjoyed this episode. Please share on social media and with family and friends.
Yes, please do share and subscribe. We're on all major podcast platforms. Inshallah, we'll see you next time.
I look forward to it. But for now, thank you for listening.
Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.